Okay, you guys, really pleased to have our partner here. Hi, Greg Johnson from the Govs project. And I think a lot of people are wondering, well, I know I am, all about the project, what they're doing with their business, with Helium, and then kind of the plans of what they're going to be doing with IOTA. And I know that they've been working with folks in different parts of the IF on different things. So what I like to do is kind of turn it over to Greg. And Greg, people will maybe popping in, just get used to the popping in and maybe some questions that come at you. But if you need us to limit that, let us know. But why don't we go ahead and let you start? Dave, you're recording now? Is that right? Okay, thank you. Cool. All right. So Greg, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, sure. Where should I start? Should I start based on the script that we have, or?
Yeah, just go with what you were planning, and it's okay if we repeat it. Yeah, just let's go with what you got, and then we can just kind of interact if we have any questions.
Okay, great. So, hey everybody, my name is Gregory Johnson. I'm working on Govs Protocol, also known as Govs.io, where we're connecting Helium and IOTA, and helping organizations and people get internet-connected sensors, cellular and LoRaWAN, and we're helping them to do two things really easily. One is if you're a Helium miner in that community and network, there's about 450,000 hotspots and growing. Last year when Helium started, there was about 14,000, so it's grown quite a bit, and there's still more to go. But for these kind of like Helium miners, what we call it, they are kind of for low-cost IoT sensors. So to mine them, they actually need like a sensor nearby that can do that. So for Helium, what they're looking for is network use right now. So what we do as an organization is we've teamed up with manufacturers of cellular and LoRaWAN devices, and these devices sit within your home, building, and space, and they monitor things like humidity, temperature, water usage, and give you reports on how much you're saving in water usage and things like that. And they can mine using sensors from their home with their Helium miners. What we're doing with IOTA is we're working with internet connected sensors and leveraging IOTA nodes, spinning those up, as well as IOTA's smart contract to bridge this. So it's kind of a low cost storage, but also a way to take this sensor data and not put it in a centralized place. So for these sensors that we're getting, it's storing a ton of data. Typically, it's going to the cloud. We're looking to bridge that in a way where people own their data as well as they own the sensor. We're looking at bridging that for assets and ownership and monitoring and doing it at a big scale. And for this project, people always ask me, Greg, how'd you get into this? And why did you use IOTA and why Helium? So I'm in a place in the US called Miami, Florida, where, I'm not sure if you guys have kept keeping up with all the news, but our area is super crypto friendly. This place is, having a ton of people come in from Coinbase and all these kind of organizations kind of like setting up shop here and like doing all this promotion of their different projects. And for us, one of the things that we're working on as a business, which I'll talk about in a little bit, was we kept seeing kind of people having these limitations with the current projects on blockchains like Ethereum, fees, limitations in scaling with Solana, and also the challenge of not being eco-friendly, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, all these different projects are coming up, even like Citycoin, which is based on a project called Stacks, just came back to those things. So it's always kind of like this question of how do you do this in an eco-friendly way? How do we eliminate the free fees? As well as how do we think about scaling this? And for all of these kind of like three categories, IOTA spoke to that. As we kind of did our research and looked at all the organizations that were collaborating with IOTA for the last couple of years, you kind of noticed it was a really kind of pivotal time, especially now that they've released IOTA smart contracts and they're doing assembly and Shimmer. So for this project, we combined both of those things. Our project is up right now. We actually have a mobile app and dashboard. So the way folks can interact with us is this month we're going to be releasing a sale. So you can buy these sensors and get it shipped wherever you are to your home to set up. If you're a Helium miner, we have about 200 folks that are doing that. And out of those 200 folks, you have 500 sensors that we're going to deliver in this first batch. And if you're on IOTA and you don't have a helium sensor, you can still get one and kind of set it up, because each sensor is going to be on a node that we spin up through our service. And what we're looking to do is just bridge market adoption in this field. We've collaborated with IOTA Foundation in September on a letter of intent, where the goal behind that was to actually use IOTA for a different purpose, but which is really similar, but for light electric vehicles. So we've teamed up with a lot of the electric scooter companies in the US that are really popular, as well as some in Europe. And in certain areas, there a lot of these scooters have issues with complaints. A scooter could be tipped
Oh
over, it
yeah,
could be
big time,
red.
big time. Yeah.
So what we are doing with that is we're doing kind of real-time asset monitoring of these sensors and devices. And when residents or city staff or people make complaints, what we're doing is storing that on a mutable ledger, IOTA's Tangle, to basically see when an issue has happened and how fast the organization actually responds to that, and keep it in a mutable ledger so it can kind of be used for compliance monitoring. And it's been really useful because compared to other projects, if you're kind of taking all this data from complaints or issues on a device or asset in the field, it gets really expensive in terms of storage and cloud processing. But on IOTA, if you spin up a node that's on AWS or something like that, the cost goes down a lot. So one, cost is appealing. Two, when that data is in a mutable ledger, organizations feel more comfortable in trusting that the data is coming in is true, and they feel some type of accountability to it. So it came in from this practical point of like, okay, here's a business problem, here's one that could be solved. And then looking at the different things that could be added in there, right? There's a lot of things that could be added in there, such as if you're taking a trip using these different scooters, do you want that information to be given to a government entity? Maybe you want that to be private, and that could also live on the Tangle. So, and this can all be wrapped into a smart contract with rules and things like that. So
Hmm.
we looked at it from that perspective, and that's where we are with the project today. We're moving very fast, so I tell people all the time, like, this project is going to evolve. We're going to get a lot more market adoption, a lot more different sensors. We're starting small because we want to make sure that folks that are early in the community, that are holders of Helium HNT or Myota or Assembly or Shimmer, can participate in this. And as we grow, you figure out ways to keep you engaged and keep you rewarded for your kind of like early adoption of the service.
Cool. Now, maybe you could take you could take us just back a step back and assume that none of the IOTA community knows anything about helium and how the what the business case is or proposition is for the helium sensor aspect and what the revenue model is there, just so we can get our mind around that and then kind of maybe and then we can kind of go forward. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, sure. So Helium is a blockchain. There are a company that is stewarding a model that uses sensors, or not sensors, something they call hotspots. These
Mm-hmm.
hotspots are actually tools to use for mining. They've teamed up with a bunch of different manufacturers, and folks can order these hotspots. And through this, they function as kind of like low cost sensors can connect to these different hotspots. So traditionally, if you wanted to kind of like get data sent to a cloud or like a database, you'd have to have either a cellular chip, but some use radio frequency. So what Helium has done is they've made it really cheap and affordable to set up these different miners. And the
Mm-hmm.
incentivization model behind it is you buy this miner, you set it up wherever, earn helium credits or helium HNT for that work. And folks are like mining a lot. Some folks that we see in our network are buying like 60 miners that have delivered and shipped, and they're setting up kind of like their own hotspots in their areas. And the whole mentality behind it is, rather than giving all of the kind of like resources to telecom communities, with Helium, anybody can be their telecom community, can kind of be their own telecom company. And the
Mm-hmm.
point is, the more people that are connected to your low on kind of like sensors on your network to where a miner is located. So you're physically going out in the community and setting up these miners. I should mention
Okay.
that. Some people
Right.
are bringing it up. Yeah.
So you physically go out and you make an arrangement with whatever location you get permission to locate your sensor, your access point essentially, right? And you plop it out there. Assuming sometimes I would assume there has to be a business arrangement if it's wherever you're going, right? And an agreement's in place. You put it out there, and then those sensors talk via, what are they using to talk to each other? Is it Wi-Fi? What is it? What are we using to communicate off of those sensors?
Yeah, so most of the sensors, the hotspots that they call them, or miners, they use Wi-Fi. So you have to
Yeah.
set them
Okay.
up. It has to be an area that has Wi-Fi. Like you said, you may have an arrangement. Most people are putting these in their homes or their offices, and then they have what they call proof of coverage, which is hotspots that are in a network are randomly
Mm-hmm.
and automatically assigned to the proof of coverage to test that hey, this network is up.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a LoRaWAN sensor or radio sensor in that area, you earn by processing that. If that sensor picks up that hey, you have a helium miner in the area, you earn helium credits. So they're incentivizing people to go out and kind of set up what they call the people's network, and it's
Mm-hmm.
grown a lot within the last year. It's 450,000 miners now. If you go to helium.com and look at Explorer, you can see where these are. They're in Europe, they're in US, they're in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So I always understood that Helium actually also functions as a router that I now share in the network. Is that correct? Because based on what I just heard from you, it's more like I have a router and now I share it through Helium, but Helium itself is not the router.
So clarify a question again for me.
So is Helium the router, or do I just have some other router that Helium then connects other people through the mesh network to my router?
Okay, I get what you're saying. So is Helium a Wi-Fi connection point? Is that what you're saying, or do you need a Wi-Fi connection point, a router to connect to Helium?
Yes. Yeah. Is it one or two? Yeah.
Yeah. So right now, yes, you do need internet access to do it. So in our Helium deployment, in quite a few cities, we had to like you said, make a business arrangement, have Wi-Fi set up, and then Helium acts as the data transfer protocol.
Okay. Okay. So I've heard interesting numbers around a miner. What type of return are these miners getting on their, what type of money are they making?
It depends on where you're setting it up. So we've seen people say, "Hey, we're making like 5 cents a day," and then there's people that are making like thousands of dollars in a given month. And it's really just
Okay.
based on where you set it up. The less
Sure, I
competition,
understand. I just didn't understand what the range was. I was just kind of curious so we can understand. So,
yeah,
okay. So the more of these you get, so they can make 5 cents a day, or if you're in a pretty decently dense area of use, office building or something like that, a region of condos or whatever where there's a lot of use, and then your pay will vary based upon just use patterns, so, and where you're located, so, and how many of them you have, right, and how many people are in your environment, right, is there's it's each miner, just it's whatever each miner processes, right, so the more dense the denser that becomes with other miners that you don't own, reduces your finance opportunity, right?
yeah.
Okay, cool, understood. So if you got a whole bunch of people trying to do the same thing in your own neighborhood, that your business can actually go down. It'll drop.
Yeah, depending on the sensors in that area as well, because that's what's using to be mined. But yeah, the theory is the more sensors. But the thing is, with density and network effects, then there's more opportunities as well
Sure.
for folks
No,
to
yeah,
like.
I get it. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how it works. And these, how much do these sensors typically set you back? What are each sensor going for?
So that's depending on the companies that Helium is working with. So
Mm.
right now, if you go to the website and kind of like want to buy a miner, one, I've heard a lot of people say, "Hey, getting one of these hotspots takes a long time," but I've seen anything from $500 and upward, depending on the type of hotspot you want to get.
Okay.
And it's all kind of like listed on, and there's like different things like Bobcat miners. Some miners are good, some aren't as good. They recently released something called Free to Five, and Free to Five is actually their 5G hotspot. So they're
Mm.
extending the Helium cryptocurrency by providing 5G cellular coverage. And that's really interesting because then that gets into the question of like Wi-Fi. So they're getting into that, but the base of Helium was on kind of like these low-cost sensor networks and lower coverage.
Yeah, that would make sense. So the 5G ones would actually give you better penetration through buildings. It'll give you a whole lot better. I mean, that's a better gear to do that, for sure. Cool.
I was
Um,
I was looking at miners today, and I can tell you that most of them you a path that seems really long and hard to actually purchase them, and then when you get them, the waits on some of them were about 20 to 28 weeks.
That's pretty handy. So, is there any, you can't provision your own, right? You can't, I can't, like, I'm an ex-Cisco guy. Like, if I went out and went to Cisco and bought a whole bunch, and I can't like figure out how to put a miner together with like a Cisco AP or anything like that. It has to.
I mean, I don't speak for Helium, but I read they were working on a desktop app for a miner, assuming you had, hardware that complied with the open spec that I'm assuming it's supporting.
Okay.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I'd be curious to understand, or maybe Govs, I don't know if you know anything about it, anything about the Dish partnership in particular. Is that to me is a big boy internet service provider as opposed to a crypto startup, as an example, saying, hey, we're here to accelerate the 5G rollout. I'm curious if you have any insights into what that means or any plans with that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk for Helium, but as a partner, we're really excited by it because we think it just demonstrates the power of the People Network. This started because Helium said, let's partner with a select group of kind of like third-party manufacturers. Let's kind of set up this process around community approval of who we're going to let in. And as a result, they've grown the network a lot, and bigger organizations are kind of seeing their methodology, how they're kind of lowering the price point, and how they're creating something that's kind of new. And they're aligning with that. And I think and I hope there's going to be more kind of like deals coming like that in the coming years. But again, I think it's still very early days. I think in the network beyond like the Dish deals, it's going to be about network usage. So what we're seeing it is, okay, now that this network is out there and there's 460,000 kind of like miners, how do you use this? How do you get utility out of it? I think that's the next question that's being. But in terms of Dish, I mean, a lot of these legacy kind of institutional organizations that have run telecom for the last kind of like few decades. If a new player is coming up and showing a new model where people are like literally setting up things and going to thousands of different miners in different cities, I think it's really attractive to them to say, hey, how can we be a part of this? How can we line up and join this network? Or how do we kind of like join in on this opportunity to grow? And I think Helium is really just aligning itself to kind of be one of the kind of like legacy companies, at least in cryptocurrency, leveraging kind of like telecom. They're a telecom company in my mind, but they're leveraging crypto and incentives to add a little bit more value to how they serve customers and how they serve this ownership model of, hey, you can buy a miner and earn cash from people trying to tap into your miner.
Yeah.
I like it. I mean, if I can add one point to that, I'd say if you look at how the infrastructure has been monetized over the different generations, you had pay-per usage from minutes to number of messages to quantity of messages. And on the other side, you have if you are getting the service for free, you are the product, not the service. To me, this seems like an opportunity to answer the question of what's the business model that coincides with this, and the whoever answers that question becomes the new, Google, so to speak, but does it in a democratic way where it's kind of for everyone that uses the system as opposed to the corporate entity that creates it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why we're excited by this for the Govs Protocol. I want everybody, like, let's say everybody in this room uses Govs Protocol and they buy one of the commercial sensors we've aligned up with. In some ways, these sensors build on top of the network that's established already, but it gives new avenues to think about what you can build. I'd love to say, hey, in the next year or two, based on the current sensors we've dished out in smart homes and smart buildings, somebody in here might buy 10 sensors, and off those 10 sensors, we help them manage that. And the management of that means maybe you're getting $10 out of this sensor per sensor in a month, and for the protocol fee we're getting maybe 10%, but now you have this active kind of like residual income coming in, similar to if you're buying property or any type of house or any type of asset. That's how we're thinking about it. And where we see kind of NFTs today, on a second point, it's kind of like this relative value where it's like supply, demand, limitations. But what happens when you can own like these utility sensors, whether it be electric charge station, for example, or like a sensor that you can place in a building that looks at like water usage and say, hey, I've set this thing up. I don't have to touch it because this protocol is kind of like doing it in a permissionless way for me, but I can look at my phone and I can look at my wallet and I can see that this asset is earning me XYZ, and it can be in fiat and current or crypto. So for me, I see this as like one model that's set that up, and I see what IOTA has built as strong technology to provide that path. And what we're looking to do at Govs is one, show the way to this, but two, build APIs and infrastructure. So if you want to spin up a node and kind of run this yourself and kind of set up on this type of network, you can do it as well. And I think these are where the kind of stars are aligning. So people ask me why now. I always say, hey, Helium is at top growth. IOTA is releasing and delivering a lot of different solutions. The technology is sound. Bridging these is a no-brainer. It's just finding the right pathway to get there, and I think that's where we're starting.
Okay, so essentially, Govs is basically setting up. You're selling gear, but you're also trying to establish kind of APIs and basically applications, right, that can run on this network, right? And figuring out different business use cases to run on this, and so that you can manage. The miners will be able to monetize this, and then IOTA will be used to. Will it be a miner? Will you have a choice of a miner here? Will you be able to either use a Helium miner and then use an IOTA node, or what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's about simplicity. So at the end of the day, when a sensor is purchased through the Govs protocol, what we see it is as creating a new ownership model. In the same way you'd buy an NFT, you're getting an asset that you now own. It's physical. It's also digital in some case because it's owning data. And off of that, we see models of what happens when that asset is now needs to store data somewhere. Traditionally, that goes to a cloud company, right? It'd go to a centralized database. But what happens if that can go to a distributed ledger where it's spun up or sending data to a node that you've set up? What happens when ownership of that data is outright to you? And if somebody wants to get access to that, they need to pay you or compensate you in some way. So to answer your question, yes, a little bit we see that, but we also see like this path of like redistributing ownership. And we see Helium as kind of like the first front runner in this in a distribution model where it's like if you give people power and incentivize them with ways to earn, they'll go out and set up their own networks. It's just now about like how do we get usage and how do we do this at scale. So to answer your question, yes, we want to definitely build those blocks. And as an ex Microsoft guy on my side, I'm very familiar with like infrastructure and building this. We've seen the growth of things like Azure and AWS and different tools that are on the cloud that provide the shovels. I think able to say to anybody here that is an IOTA and may not buy Helium miner, hey, here's the service where you can spin up a node and get all these different services and infrastructures, little lines of code, as well as earn potentially on this. I think that's a kind of like an interesting offering, but I also see it as one that can use this kind of scale model. And what we're seeing here in the US with IOTA is a hesitancy between investors to look at IOTA as like a functional kind of like crypto compared to like the other ones that are like earning and having this. And I think how we shift that is by shaping the market into seeing absolute value versus relative value, what we're seeing with NFTs. But that's my perspective on it. I think that's what we're going to kind of see in the next couple of weeks as we roll out more features and as people get their devices shipped to them, which won't be in the 20 kind of like weeks that we see kind of with the Helium project, since we're dealing with manufacturers that are in the US and Canada and all those things. We're going to see a little bit of a shaping of the market, and hopefully we can kind of create and build value in that. So IOTA holders earn, people that spin up these nodes earn, people that are mining Helium today that are connected to this network and getting sensors earn. But really, you also own something that's real and tangible as well.
Okay. I'm confused on how the IOTA node owner makes money in this model. But that's because I'm dense. But maybe you can take me through that. So, I understand how Helium node makes money, but how does the IOTA node owner make money? What are you? I think I'm missing something here. I can understand how you guys would write to the Tangle, and how that will be your basically, instead of you storing information in a cloud provider and having to pay them, I could see how you could use us to store information potentially for free on the Tangle, because I'm assuming this data that you're sending is very small. But help me out with this missing link on how the IOTA node owner makes money in this.
Yeah, and this is still like a model being built out, so I wouldn't say, hey,
Okay, that's That's fair. That's fair.
I would just phrase it in this way. Data is valuable. Your data is valuable, right? If you buy an Amazon Alexa and it sits in your house, it's collecting data on you. If you drive your car and it's an electric vehicle or not, it's collecting data on you. Somebody in the data brokerage model, at least in the US or in America, is selling that data and using it without your consent. And like somebody said at the beginning of this, if you're getting something for free, then you're kind of like the product, right? So your data is valuable. So here is IOTA, which is kind of secure data. Here is this place to empower people. Here's this place to connect devices and machines. Devices and machines are going to produce tons of data. Most organizations storing that data are probably going to be like, we can't store all this data because it's a ton. So in that, there's value, right? So if you get a sensor and it's in your home, it's giving water usage data, and it has a bunch of time series data, just by the fact that it's sending data to some place, somebody sees that as valuable. So for us, we're looking at, in this value, if you're now the owner of that sensor and device, how do you get rewarded for that if somebody wants to ask you for it? You know, today, if Lime or a scooter company owns an asset, they set it up and they earn percentage every time somebody rides their vehicle. Now, in this new kind of model, we think ownership is going to change in some cases with the sharing model, where now if you have an asset that you own and somebody wants to access it, you can determine the model for fees and payments. So for us, we're seeing that kind of like value being accrued, and we think that's going to lead to a lot of like different interesting kind of plays. Take the Helium model, which is for wireless networks, and apply it to something like EV charging stations or driving EV cars, for example. Today, there is networks of EV charging providers in the US and the Americas that are making a lot of cash from centralizing kind of like the ownership of EV charging stations. But what if you shift that model and I say to everybody here, hey, you guys can all buy your own EV charging station in the same way you buy a vending machine. And when people use that, you earn some. So I think that's how we're phrasing it. Whereas like, hey, value is being distributed to now people. And if we give you the tools to kind of like earn off of that and scale that up without having to do too much work, it kind of creates this network effect. So that's how we're looking at it. And it's always from what's the problem to be solved? How can we help add value to the network? Not how do we replace it?
Okay, I get it now. Yeah, there's a lot. There's got to be a lot around it. A lot of application development. A lot of finding the right business case and situations. But it's, I mean, it's there. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. And really, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, the IOTA node can help you decide how you want to share your data, and that also implies how you can monetize it, and you know, and that will be dependent upon the applications that you think you can serve, based upon you know, the business problem you're trying to help solve. So, okay, I think I got that. Anybody else have any questions on this?
Yeah, I just want to add one point. I think to your point, you know, that's one aspect of it, but think of the entirety of the internet and every website that you visit, and how it all connects to make that possible. And give you the scary / real story of the last 24 hours. So went through the fun process of spinning up a Hornet node for the first time, because why not? Had a friend work with me for doing it. We spun up a virtual instance. It's a 2-core, 64 gig of memory on a cloud provider I had never heard of. All right, so my friend like went through the process, installed Hornet, sent me a link in an Android text messaging app. It was just a link to the node at this point. And the only other time I've ever mentioned this cloud provider was on the phone call that I had yesterday with him. Today, I get a banner ad on Twitter for this cloud provider specifically. And I didn't kind of consent to that. I have no idea how they stitched it together, but realize that it's like the entire digital property of the internet plays the game that's being played today. And I think, you know, what Govs is talking about here is kind of the start of changing that model to where who owns the data and who benefits from that data on a foundational level. So kudos for getting it off the ground. I'm a big fan and supporter, and I think you guys are on the right track. So
yeah, I'm just trying to I'm just trying to understand and get it, and it's interesting to me, and I'm just trying to elicit responses to see if the other people that are listening have actually I'm assuming that they have some of the same questions that I do, and just aren't piping up. Hint, hint. But
well, I'm not shy, but the last thing I want to mention there, so
yeah,
that Hornet node, I think this is kind of important. That Hornet node's been running for what 48 hours plus, has never consumed more than 2 gigs of memory out of the 64, never more than 10% of utilization, and whatever the default config is, that's what it's running. And it's cost me a whopping 76 cents.
yeah, it's
So like
amazing.
coming full circle to the spinning up my own node point, we're not talking about buying a $2,000 graphics card or a farm of them, you know, to try and get this operational to deliver on these technologies. So providing the tools to make it possible, I think, goes hopefully a long way where we're going.
I can totally relate to Greg when you were talking about the scooters. I live in the Seattle region, and well, I'm right by Microsoft. So there are scooters everywhere. Microsoft employees, but everywhere, the city of Redmond, Bellevue, people just like they drop them and leave them, and you see them, lying on the sidewalks all over the place. There's tons of reports all the times in the local newspapers about how people trip over them and how they just randomly left in places. And so in some cities, like in parts of Seattle, they were actually removed because they became such, in some cases, a hazard for people. I'm a big proponent of them because they're clean and they get people around, and that's all excellent. But they do have this problem of locating them, finding them, getting them back, and making sure that they don't fall into a problem with the law, the regulations, and so forth, because a lot of them are having that issue. So I could totally see that how this would work for helping that. And as the network grows, this becomes even more viable for those guys. Because I'm amazed at where these scooters go. These people, like, I'll see them up in kind of like way suburbia, like way away from any city center, like 20 miles away. It's ridiculous. And so how they track these things, I don't know. Maybe this would be how they could do that. So
Yeah, and to speak to that point a little bit too, it's interesting because some cities, depending on in the U.S., they ask for all that data. So in some cases, your data of where you're going from point A to point B can actually be shared to that city, which is kind of like, it's kind of like surveillance. Like, I don't believe Seattle is one of those places, but we see all these different interesting kind of use cases, and the Internet of Everything kind of vast in terms of use cases. We see a lot of people put it out there, like the Internet of Everything is here, machine to machine communication, but a lot of these different things don't talk to each other in an interoperable way. They're very messy in terms of how they're storing data and getting security. So on our side, wrangling all of these things into like one standard, as well as providing a service on top of that can say to use a user, customer, organization, hey, here's the way that you can like get this sensor and start seeing as mini transactions or micro transactions happen on this given sensor. So we see a lot of kind of use cases popping up. We're starting with kind of like the EV mobility, and then for the Govs use case, we see a bunch of folks that are going to be getting smart home and smart building sensors, which can be used for like real things such as like getting alerts of different issues are happening for like water flow, for example. That's one of the things we've seen at least on college campuses, and we think bridging these things and giving people the option of saying, hey, I want to be a part of this, I want to own my data, and I want to be able to say what that data does is going to be really powerful. As it rolls out, we see a lot of opportunity in saying to Helium miners, who are really attracted to this, by the way, because they want to get more rewards. For IOTA, it's going to be a lot of just seeing how this kind of rolls out as we look to see mainnet, see what happens with assembly, as well as seeing what they do with a bunch of the different services and infrastructure and documentation they put up. And for us, it's going to be about figuring out in the bridging of that how to provide more value to the builders and the people that are building projects, or the non-builders, the people that just are participants and holders and want to be a part of something, but they don't have time to do all the technical pieces of it. We see making it easier for them to interact with this is going to be a huge way to kind of get a win for adoption of IOTA, as well as for how the value is perceived, not just in places like Europe, but also in Americas and Latin America, as well as in different places. So
cool. How many people do you have in Govs now?
Govs was a small team right now, so we have 5 people.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, this is Andy. I just with all of these sensors and Govs, do you buy the sensors from Govs instead of buying miners from Helium? I'm kind of confused on the sourcing aspect of, like, if, again, I'm not technical, but I want to participate. The Helium miner seemed like something super easy because you plug in and it activates and it starts collecting to your wallet and you feel like you're making money. That's what at least I understood from trying to buy one kind of machine today. How does Govs connect that kind of transaction opportunity, I guess?
Yeah, so there's two audiences here. For the folks that are on IOTA that don't have a Helium miner, it's a little bit different. For the folks that have Helium miners, they buy a sensor. It's plug and play. It's a LoRaWAN sensor, so you could put it by your miner. You earn cash in your wallet, but you also get to save money because it's smart building sensors designed to do two things very well. One, save you on AC. Well, first, give you AC analytics. So if you have an AC unit in your building, being able to see that. Two, being able to give you kind of remote access to water flow, look at humidity and temperature. So in the case of these sensors, they offer more of a saving function, as well as looking at the data that's being produced from it, which is valuable to other organizations. But that's what you get from this. If you're on IOTA and you buy a sensor, it's just going to be something that you can say, hey, I bought this sensor and I choose to store this data on a distributed ledger, which could be someone on a node that you could set up yourself, or click a button and get it spun up. And now you're storing that data and have access to it, and it's not given to a third party. But on the other hand, you're also getting utility out of this, right? It's giving you alerts and notifications. So that's where the difference is for what we've kind of like built on the Govs protocol, and it connects again to Helium. So if you have Helium miners in your area, or you're looking for Helium miners, you can see that all on the map and interface. But you don't necessarily have to be a Helium participant or miner to kind of like earn or see the value in this. We don't have a tokenization model to it, so we're not going to say, hey, you set this up and you get a Govs token. That's something that we've seen with folks like IOTA Mesh, which is building out in Europe, and we think that's great, but that's not a part of our model today.
So if I have multiple vending trucks that have refrigeration on them, is this something where I could deploy those sensors?
Yes.
Okay.
Would those sensors be also useful for like warehouses? Because I have across the highway a bunch of warehouses like Walmart.com and Nestle, for example. Would that be
Yeah.
a use case for them?
Yeah. So in the same way, Helium has built a wireless network that's helped people kind of set up in like China's or telecom communities. We think there's an equal opportunity for smart buildings, which is one of the biggest kind of like areas for the Internet of Things. You've already seen smart homes be kind of like this fad, but what happens when you can like say, hey, I have this sensor that can be a utility, I can set this up, and I don't have to worry about all the technical things such as like, does this protocol talk to the next? I can just set it up, spin it up on a node, which is going to be very cheap in terms of storage, and say, hey, if you want access to this data for your institution or organization, you can use it. So we see a lot of use cases come up like that. I don't want to dive too deep into one use case. We're going to probably put a bunch of them up in terms of environmental monitoring on the Govs IO website, but it's really vast of what you can do with this. And what we've seen is a lot of usage around kind of asset monitoring, fleet management, looking at different things like somebody just mentioned, like putting these things in warehouses to look at supply chain. But it's really interesting of what you can do with this, but not just what you can do with this, but how valuable the data is that it's getting from this. Because you got to think about it from, if this is time series data, the sensor is always on and it's always collecting that data. So somebody thinks of it as valuable, especially if you get enough of it. And on top of that, you can build models to this to make predictions of weather and predictions of water spend. So these are interesting kind of like areas we see that as data becomes more popular and democratized, we also see this kind of arena of what happens when data is decentralized. And if you have all this data that's decentralized, how do you build AI models? You may have to go and say, hey, everybody here in this call, if you have sensors, we want to tap into that data because we want to be able to train our model. Or there may be some other routes. This is just speculation at this point, but that's how we kind of see a lot of this playing out with the role of data and AI.
So if you have these sensors that are collecting all this information, are you again, let's go back to my vending routes with refrigerated trucks. am I able to use these internally and not necessarily share that information with other people, or like kind of how do I play with that information, I guess?
Yeah, so it's going to be up to you. The data again is yours, so you own it. If you want to interact with it or manage that data on our protocol, there'd be fees associated with doing that. But again, the goal here is to make sure that you own this data and whatever you decide to do with it. So if you have that use case and you're like, hey, I could set this up, but I don't want to manage the process of like managing this data and like getting this data from read to write and then having to set up my own application, which you could do. You could spin up, we can give you access to API endpoints since you own that data. But I think that's the point of like, okay, once you have all these things in place, there's still some barriers that need to be set up to kind of actually get value from it. So, I mean, like you said, that's a very interesting use case that could happen once you have these sensors and you can set that up. But anything that you buy through Govs, the data is yours. You can control it. If it's in a smart building, a smart home, all we can probably do is interface and read that data. But the goal here is to shift ownership models from one central entity owning the data to you having access to it and determining how that person should be able to access that data, or if they should even have any access at all.
So this is Alex. So what's like the main thing that's constraining you right now, and how can the community help you?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think the main thing constraining us is just getting more activity in the IOTA community. So for us, I mean, I know like there's different projects and they have different timelines, but we're here and ready to go. Like this is not next year we'll be able to launch this thing or we're going to be able to build this. Like these are sensors that are manufactured, they commercially, they have accreditation, they have all these things in place. So when we're giving it to you, it's not something that's a DIY. For us, it's just going to be about shaping that model on top of IOTA and looking for ways to incentivize communities to kind of leverage this for whatever use case that they see. We know from IOTA's kind of origin story that it was designed for IoT in some ways, and it's designed to handle all these different microtransactions. So for us, it's going to be about, okay, how do we get this in the hands of early people? We see community is the biggest thing to help us shape our applications, our services. Those are the things that we really need in terms of early adoption. And then from there, we can shape it. And we look at communities today like Doodles on the Ethereum community. If you're not into like NFTs, we look at Bored Ape and all these other things like that. These are just JPEGs. So what happens if I say to everybody here that you can own this physical sensor and thing, and you can use the data and produce it for whatever you want? We think there's a lot of kind of like opportunities. And we think it's opportunities to not just generate wealth and value for the coin, but also for folks that are really early into the community. So for us, that's the primary goal: building community, continuing these engagements online, speaking with folks that may have different opinions and ideas, as well as helping builders in the community, such as the hundreds of projects that are coming out from Sooniverse to IOTA bots. There's a lot of stuff coming out, and we're really excited by it. For us, we're just more excited about like the real world kind of adoption because we think that's what's going to move the needle a lot further.
So in terms of frameworks of IOTA, which frameworks are you having most trouble with, or which frameworks do you need most help with?
So our lead engineer on this project, he would probably be the best person to talk about with this. From what I know today, he doesn't have any challenges as we use kind of like we're using IOTA Tangle, as everybody knows. We've looked at IOTA streams, of course, the IOTA smart contract. For us, it's just about kind of like right now, a lot of stuff is in testnet. So we're a little bit hesitant on moving anything to production, at least for a lot of the early users of the protocol, because we're unsure of how this will work at scale. We know that there's a lot of kind of like background to that, but that's some things that we could probably use from the community. For folks that want to spin up a node and say, hey, if you want, and somebody wants to store data on top of this node instead of doing it themselves, we're happy to do that. Like we're looking for things like that. We're also looking for feedback on the APIs. There may be some people here like, okay, cool, Govs is doing something cool, but I have this better idea to use IOTA for my own project. And if in that case, we'd love to see how we can build the picks and shovels to help support that in terms of infrastructure so you can go ahead and be great at your project. So those are the things we're looking now. It's really about building community and doing it with transparency. That's why if you look at the Govs.io website and you go to Teams, we have our faces there. We're not trying to be kind of like in a place where we kind of like accrue all this value and then disappear. In the same vein, we're not also trying to dive too deeply into a concept without understanding the legal applications to that, meaning if we're doing an ICO and creating a token, what does that mean? How does this impact us if we need to scale? We don't want to overpromise, but at the same time, we are making sure that we deliver something and it's visible so the community can see it, whether it be an application, something you can test, something that you can use, and building off that early feedback. So these are the ways that we're looking to get kind of like a little bit more support from IOTA, and it's primarily community engagement, feedback, and letting us know how we can improve and build something that you want to use and you want to be a part of.
Philo, are you still with us? No? Okay. You've been, Greg, have you guys have been working at some level with the IF, right?
So we've signed a letter of intent with IF in September 2021 around the EV protocol that we just mentioned with you, which we successfully got off the ground. From there, we do know the IOTA Foundation, they can't publicly say, well, they can, but they're probably not going to do it because there's going to be a ton of projects. So in that hand, they do know about our work. They do know about our progress. They do know that we're bridging IOTA and Helium, and we're kind of creating that kind of like chain and opportunity around data sharing and representation. So they are very aware of this project. I think everybody's kind of like in the seat of like, what are they going to do? So in this next month, if we ship 500 sensors and people say, hey, we just got the Govs Protocol sensors, like people see it as tangible. So that's where we kind of stand. I would say the difference between our project and a lot of others is it's not the immediate gratification of like, let's putting up a bunch of 3D renders of a JPEG and saying, hey, get this for $0, kind of IOTA and a wallet. It's not that immediate gratification. It's more of like, how do we actually build value into this and give a long-term thing so people keep coming back to it? So the problem that we are solving is a hard one. It is a complex one, but it's also a needed and necessary one. And we're seeing that from organizations. So we know there's a lot of opportunity for early users of the protocol to be in early and see the upside to what happens of being early in kind of like a protocol like this. And we've seen it, and you can see it with like the NFTs, or you can look at Uniswap, or you can look at ENS records. When you get early and you're part of something where there's a team that has a vision and experience and are delivering constantly, magic tends to happen, and we want to create magic with this community.
So I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, Greg. So your Gov Sensors, if I would buy one today, out of the box, if it's within a Helium access point, gateway, router, whatever you call it, it's going to connect. Where's that data going to go right out of the box?
The data out of the box. So one, the Helium miners is separate from the Govs Protocol sensors. There are Helium miners that people already own, which is why they're buying the sensors, because they can mine from their home rather than having to like go outside and drive up the block or go 10 miles to set up these things where they don't have visibility of the miners. So those two are separate. These devices can work with the Helium miners to help them earn, but if you're an IOTA person and you don't have a Helium miner and you get this by default, this data would go to where you choose as your storage. The first piece today, since IOTA's, a lot of the stuff isn't like in mainnet, especially with the smart contract, is it goes to a cloud. What we do and we're working on today is tightening it up. So if you choose, you can decide where you want this data to be stored. And some folks, like organizations, they're like, put it in the cloud, put it in our cloud, we don't care. But some of you may say, we want to set this up and put this on IOTA's Tangle versus on a cloud instance, and that's where the data should live.
All right, so the sensor is configurable with the API. You point to an endpoint being an AWS or an MQTT broker or some API, and it's a LoRaWAN sensor, correct? So it needs to jump on a network.
So we have two types of sensors. The LoRaWAN are for Helium. So if you're a Helium miner, that's the one you want. But we also have cellular ones too. So you can just get those and decide where you want that data to be stored. And yes, just like you said, MQTT, we match up with all those different protocols. We have integrations with AWS IoT, Microsoft Azure IoT, a bunch of different kind of protocols. We've set up those integrations because we've done this before in the cloud. It's just really about creating a new access point, which is putting this on a chain and creating a new source of value around it. If some of you guys have been following us early, we've also put up some kind of like 3D model renders of how the sensors look. Just incentivizing as we look at like new models of ownership around these things to say, hey, what if you bought a sensor and you had a stamp of approval saying you own this thing from physical to digital as an NFT? So there's different things we're exploring on our roadmap that we don't concretely know if this is going to make the most sense. But yes, today out of the box, if you buy the sensor and you get it, it's storing data on the cloud, and you're going to have the option to say, I want to store this data somewhere else, and that data can be stored on IOTA Tangle through a node that you spin up yourself or a node that we already have. And yeah, that's kind of like the process today.
And how do you configure a sensor as a built-in AP, or how does your average Joe set it up?
Yeah, so the sensors are plug and play. So out of the box, if you get it through the Govs Protocol, it's already going to be kind of onboarded. So it's really going to be like a plug and play. So if you have a humidity sensor, you get it out of the box, you put some batteries in it, you decide where you want to put that up. If it's a water flow sensor, we give you kind of like these instructions, but it's really just kind of like really simple to put up. We've tested all of these things ourselves. In some cases, there may need to be an HVAC contractor with the manufacturer you've worked with based on your location, which today is kind of like really rooted in the Americas. They would have to probably send somebody out there to set it up. But for 80% of the sensors, you can set up yourself in your smart home or building or space or apartments without any troubles.
Okay, so you power it up, and then where do we go to see the measurements?
Then you go into the app. So we have an app, a mobile app on iOS and Android. You'd go into that and be able to see your data.
All right, so then, okay, so Govs has a backend with dashboards, and then a fees involved for that data storage out of the box, or is it all included in the purchase? If it's a, I guess if it's a LoRaWAN, what's the fees versus where there's no LoRaWAN available? If you have to do the 4G version, I guess there must be some sort of cellular charge, right?
Yeah, so there would be a cellular charge to that. As we look at the options and we're doing user testing on this, we're looking at making sure that is really clear up front. So if there is a kind of like fee that needs to accrue and happen, we can work with you to make sure that that's clear. But yes, if it's cellular, there's going to be fees applied to that. And from the storage angle, there may also be fees, but it's cheaper definitely to do it on IOTA Tangle than to do it on like a traditional storage. So yes, those are the things that would come with it.
Okay, so potentially if you went 5G, you would avoid the cellular charge. All right?
Yeah. So if you wanted to do it, you would want to kind of like do it in a different way. But we're not trying to, it's supposed to be agnostic. We don't want to let you, we want to give you options of where you want that data to live and how you want that data to connect, whether it's through the low cost sensors, through LoRaWAN, or whether you want to do it through cellular.
Okay.
Or 5G. 5G is still new, by the way. That's Freedom 5, which I think was launched last time I looked at it. Helium was last year through their network. So that's something separate. But yeah, those would be the options.
So if we go, you said it's on iOS and Android?
Yes. So for the work that we've done, we've built it on iOS and Android. We are still incorporating some things in the development end so you can see these assets, since we're doing a bunch of different IoT, different devices and assets. So we know that you're going to be more concerned about the assets that matter to you. So we're setting up in a way where you can kind of see that. So that is still under development.
Have you connected?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So how do if I'm on the app store, what do I search for?
So right now it's in test flight, so we haven't put a production app yet out.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah, your turn, Giancarlo. Go ahead.
Gianfranco. Yeah, Gianfranco here.
Sorry.
Have you connected LoRaWAN with IOTA, or are you using that already?
Have I connected LoRaWAN with IOTA? Meaning with the LoRaWAN sensor, have I been able to store data from that sensor on IOTA's Tangle? Is that the question?
Yeah. If you have done that.
Yeah. So we already have we've already run pilots. We've run tests on most of these use cases that we're bringing to you. We're not shipping without kind of like testing it out. So we've run tests on this for LoRaWAN sensors using air quality. I think we shared one of those on the Twitter. So we're actually physically going out and testing all these things, and we're doing this because from a process flow, we know crypto has this reputation of being kind of like not as user friendly. So for us, we're making sure that we bring this to folks that don't know anything about IOTA or don't know anything about Helium, and the steps make sense. So we've run these tests, and today we're just making sure that as we roll this out to the first early beta testers, the instructions are crisp and clear. The feedback loops are there. That way, if there's anything to correct and improve, we can do that. And if you guys have been following us on Twitter, even on Discord, you see that that's kind of like in our DNA. So we wrote an essay about the protocol. Some folks are just like, we're still confused on what this is. So we're doing this talk to kind of clarify, but we also rewrote that to make it a little bit easier for folks to understand it. But we're iterating, and at the same time, we're making sure from a legal, from a sensor related standpoint, you're getting high quality products. And if anything were to happen, let's say you're outside of an area where we can deliver to, refunds are given early, or we just let you know, hey, we're not delivering sensors in this area yet if you're like in Korea or someplace. So just want to kind of share that with everybody, because we're really making sure that from a transparency angle, make sure everything is upfront. That way anybody in the community doesn't feel like they've been kind of like given something that's not true. And at the same point, because we're a project tied to a legal entity that is based in the US, we got to make sure that everything on, hey, if you're based in Europe, you can delete your data, or if you're based in the US, you should be able to delete your data for using GDPR, which is in the Europe. Like, we want to make sure all of those things are put in, so we're doing this by the books. And that's why it's taking a little bit longer. We'd love to say apps in store, you can buy your sensors today, ship it, and then everybody gets different experiences, but we're trying to make sure that's all the best experience possible as we dish it out.
Question. Any chance that you run any of those proof of concepts on any of the STM like Discovery IoT kits or the STM Electronic, utility smart meters that run the X-Cube 32 package?
No, we have not.
Got it. The only reason I bring it up, STM Electronics, #1 semiconductor in the EU that I think has done a lot of the integration work at the low level on the device itself to provide some of the libraries and tooling for how you might build higher level function like smart energy efficiency utilities. So from like an implementation standpoint, if some of the infrastructure is there to support some of that, it seems like it could feed into this and drive some of the demand, on the network side of things.
Yeah, this is great feedback. I know this is a question Q&A from me, but I'd love to hear how we can make this easier for you as you try to navigate the products. I mean, we've had a lot of people ask different questions, so those type of like statements or comments would be also helpful for us as we kind of build out this protocol and bring IOTA and Helium together in a closer way.
What are do you have a list of the total sensors that you guys have available to purchase?
Yeah, on the website we have a carousel that shows 5 of them. And this month we're going to be releasing like photos and some visuals and some infos on requirements and what actually you get per sensor. Right now we're just clearing with one of the manufacturers who isn't. I mean, as you know, a lot of these kind of traditional companies aren't as up on crypto. So say to them, hey, we're going to be storing this data from the cloud to ledger, and they look at you crazy. So clearing up some of those things before putting it up, and it's going well so far as we kind of explain it to them. But yes, there will be links to the sensors, the different sensor types, what they can do, what they've done, and hopefully we can get some like strong content in there so it kind of just shows you up front what the sensor can do.
Question. Is your team familiar with the Mesh Plus project that's out in the IOTA space? I think they just launched fairly recently as well. And if so, are they a competitor in the LoRaWAN space, or are they a potential partner, or are they kind of moving in a different direction than your project?
Yeah, so we are familiar with Mesh Plus. They've reached out. We've had a bunch of people reach out about it. We don't see them as competitors in any way. So the Mesh Plus, from what I've seen, they haven't launched yet. They have initial coin offering, and they're in private sale right now. And they have a lot of they're communicating very well what they're doing. I think we do similar things, but again, what we're building is a protocol and it's a utility. So they could potentially use our service and our dashboard and our mobile apps to spin up their instances of different internet connected devices. For us, for more of a protocol, we doing it this way because right now the tokenomics model for us, we don't want to shoot first and then think later. So tokenomics, putting up a coin, do initial coin offering. If you're based in the US, they treat those as securities, and there's a lot of legal things to go behind it. So for them, we don't see them as competitor. We also can't I wouldn't say can't, but right now we also can't say, hey, choose this project because it's great. But they could use what we're building and what we've already built to kind of amplify and accelerate their work. And that's because IoT is hard. Internet connected things are hard. There's a bunch of different protocols. They don't talk well together. If you try to scale these in terms of fleets of devices, it gets even messier. This by no means is an easy task, especially with all the data that's coming in. And because we've worked with customers like this on the cloud, we know a lot of this is hard. That's why we intentionally, for Govs IO, we don't kind of put too much language of Internet of Things, machine to machine communication, because to be frank, a lot of the average everyday people in businesses and organizations, they don't care about all this lingo. What they care about is, what do we get from this? Do we save money on this? Do we be able to run more efficiently? Does this help add money to this? How does this add value to our lives? And a lot of those languages, what we found, have been not as accessible. It works for a certain crowd, which if you guys, I mean, everybody here in IOTA, I believe people that go to IOTA, they've gone down the rabbit hole of crypto and they are really interested in it. So they do their research, and that's why they're like, okay, IOTA is something I want to be a part of. But the way we look at it, because not everybody is in that kind of like boat, we're looking at it from the utility stance of like what makes sense. If people don't care about IOTA, what do they want to hear? Oh, low cost, great. Storage, security, nodes. All right, this works for me. I can use this and kind of add it to my everyday thing. So to answer your question in a short way, no, they're not a competitor to us. Love the work that they're doing and the message that they're doing out in the Europe, and hopefully we can collaborate. Maybe they use our tool, or maybe they do their own thing. But it's good to see projects kind of like spew up with the same kind of like alignment around IoT being an opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you for the answer.
It's a great presentation. I just want to add that we might find an opportunity of collaboration since we are about to release an open source project that it's been funded by the University of Lethbridge, and it's the use of the IOTA stack to integrate with IOTA streams. Sorry, IOTA streams integrated with some sensors specifically for water quality monitoring. We are making the project very educational, so it's also integrated with the Blocky platform from Google and DID. So I think that there is opportunity for cross collaboration and communication about that.
Yeah, sounds great. Like, reach out to me. You have my handle. Definitely happy to discuss it more and see how we can collaborate.
Sure. Yeah, he's on Discord, and if you need his handle, I can get it to you later. If you don't take it, don't get it. So.
All right, what was that Google platform you were integrating with?
Blocky.
Thank you.
Blocky. Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah, John Carlos project, very cool. So it would be good for you guys to hook up, I think.
Gianfranco.
Oh, I keep doing it to you, man. I do it to you every day. I'm sorry.
It's fine. It's fine.
All right. Anybody else got any questions for Greg? He's been really good at handling everything thrown at him. So I applaud you for that. You know, we came from you in a lot of different directions. So that was well done. But I know it's also, well, it's getting pretty late your time. So I want to make sure that we're conscious of that. Anybody else have anything for Greg? Well, cool. All right. So if you guys want to get a hold of him, if you know, you can reach him on Discord. If you don't recall, or if you need to later sync up with him, you don't have his info, just hit me up. And you know, Gman214 on the Americas channel. And I think we could probably call this a wrap for this evening, unless anybody else has anything else. I didn't really have a whole lot more for this meeting. I thought I wanted to let Greg have the floor for the whole show. So anybody else?
I'll add very, you know, thanks for inviting me to this IOTA's Americas talk. Thanks everybody for asking questions. We're not disappearing. We actually want to do more engagement in this way. So we're probably going to be doing stuff. So you can track us on Discord if you haven't. Our Discord's been kind of busy and popping. We're also building at the same time, so we're not able to like put as much energy, but we do want to dedicate more resources to that. And yeah, we're not planning to disappear. We definitely want to see how this all plays out, and we can leverage IOTA for real business use cases. and we can get a bigger presence in the Americas. We know there's a hunger for it. Right now, it isn't the top coin, but we do see like this is a strong technology. So we're here to see if we can build this out and build it with the community. It makes sense. We add the things that everybody else is doing to kind of like add more engagement to their projects. But again, we're thoroughly just looking at value, and that value is like, how's this valuable to you? How does this help you in your real life, everyday business operations? Or maybe it doesn't help you, it just helps you earn. So thank you for your time, and thanks for everybody for kind of like inviting me and kind of spending time to like ask me these questions and spend time with me. So really look forward to kind of continue working with some of you as we move forward.
All right. Well, thank you very much for spending the time with us. And with that, I think we'll close this out. So you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we'll get the recording out here in the next 24 hours or so. Okay. All right. Talk to you guys later.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.